My name is Rebecca Morgan, 34, and I never thought my perfect life would crumble in just 3 weeks. Today, I'm standing in my empty bedroom, staring at the king-size bed where my husband and stepsister betrayed me. The divorce papers are signed, my husband's career is in ruins, and my stepsister is living in her car. They thought they could humiliate me, but they never expected I'd destroy everything they had. Where are you watching from today? Before I continue my story about how blood isn't always thicker than water, hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by family. The journey I'm about to share will show you exactly what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family revenge drama unfolds. 6 months ago, my life seemed picture perfect. After 12 years of marriage to Daniel, a successful corporate attorney at Wilson and Parker law firm, we had built our dream life in suburban Boston. Our 4-bedroom colonial home in Lexington had the white picket fence I'd always imagined as a little girl growing up in Ohio. We'd just finished renovating our kitchen, replacing the outdated cabinets with sleek cherry wood and installing marble countertops that gleamed under the recessed lighting. Every Sunday morning, we would enjoy brunch on our wraparound porch, discussing our upcoming week while surrounded by the meticulously landscaped garden I tended to with pride. I had worked my way up to become the head of marketing at a healthcare tech company, earning a reputation for my innovative campaigns and leadership. My colleagues respected me, and my bosses frequently praised my dedication. Daniel and I made a power couple in our social circle, him with his sharp legal mind and me with my creative business acumen. We hosted dinner parties where guests would comment on our obvious devotion to each other, often remarking how we still looked at each other like newlyweds after all these years. My stepsister Vanessa was the complete opposite of me. While I had built my career through hard work and determination, she drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship, always looking for the easy way out. Our parents married when I was 15 and she was 13, and we never quite bonded. There was always a strange competitive edge to her interactions with me, though I couldn't understand why. I had tried repeatedly over the years to forge a relationship with her, inviting her to family gatherings and offering help when she needed it. I remember Daniel asking me once, "Why do you keep trying with her? She clearly doesn't appreciate it." I had shrugged and replied, "She's family. That's what you do for family." That statement now leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. 2 months ago, Vanessa called me in tears. She had lost her apartment in Chicago after being laid off from her latest job as an administrative assistant. With no savings and nowhere to go, she begged for help. Daniel was surprisingly supportive when I suggested letting her stay with us temporarily. "Family should help family," he said, echoing my own sentiments. "We have the guest room just sitting empty. She can stay until she gets back on her feet." I was touched by his generosity. In hindsight, I should have recognized the unusual enthusiasm in his voice. Daniel had never been Vanessa's biggest fan, often commenting on her immaturity and lack of responsibility. But people change, I thought. Perhaps he was finally embracing my stepsister as part of our family. Vanessa arrived with 3 suitcases and endless gratitude. She hugged me tightly at the door, her eyes wet with tears. "I don't know what I would do without you, Rebecca," she whispered. "You're the only one who's ever really been there for me." I believed her sincerity, welcomed her into our home, and even cleared out my home office so she could have her own space to conduct job searches and video interviews. The first week went smoothly. Vanessa helped with dinner preparations, kept her space tidy, and seemed genuinely focused on finding new employment. She even suggested family movie nights, where the 3 of us would crowd onto the sofa with popcorn and wine. I noticed she always chose the seat next to Daniel, but I dismissed it as innocent. They seemed to be developing a friendly rapport, and I was happy that my husband and stepsister were finally getting along. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when things began to shift. It was subtle at first, private jokes between them that I wasn't part of, conversations that would halt when I entered a room, and the increasing frequency of Daniel offering to help Vanessa with various tasks. "I'm just being a good host," he'd say when I raised an eyebrow at him volunteering to drive her to yet another job interview. I should have trusted my instincts. Instead, I silenced the whispers of doubt and focused on being the supportive wife and stepsister I thought I needed to be. After all, this arrangement was temporary. Soon, Vanessa would find a job and her own place, and our lives would return to normal. How wrong I was. The temporary arrangement was never meant to be temporary, at least not in the way I had imagined. Unbeknownst to me, a different plan was already in motion, one that would shatter the perfect life I had so carefully constructed and reveal the true nature of the two people I had welcomed with open arms. The first concrete sign that something was amiss came 3 weeks after Vanessa moved in. I had been working late, leading a crucial marketing campaign launch that kept me at the office until past midnight for several days in a row. Exhausted but satisfied with our successful launch, I decided to surprise Daniel by coming home early on Thursday instead of staying for the team celebration dinner. I entered our house quietly, hoping to surprise him with lunch from our favorite bistro. The house was oddly silent for midday. Daniel had mentioned working from home that day to prepare for an upcoming case, and Vanessa had scheduled several remote job interviews. I called out but received no response. Assuming they might be out, I headed upstairs to change into something more comfortable. As I passed the guest bathroom, I noticed something out of place. Daniel's monogram towel hanging beside Vanessa's floral one. A small detail, but one that struck me as odd. Daniel was meticulously organized about his belongings, insisting that his towels remain in our master bathroom. I pushed the thought aside, continuing down the hallway. Then I heard it. Hushed laughter coming from Vanessa's room. I froze, recognizing both my husband's deep chuckle and my stepsister's girlish giggle. My heart began to race as I stood there, paralyzed by the implications. There could be innocent explanations, I told myself. Perhaps they were watching something funny on her laptop, or Daniel was helping her prepare for an interview. The door was slightly ajar. I should have announced my presence, but something propelled me forward silently. Through the crack, I could see them sitting side by side on her bed, shoulders touching as they looked at something on her phone. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, yet the intimacy of their posture spoke volumes. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from Vanessa's face, his fingers lingering on her cheek in a way that was unmistakably affectionate. "She'll never suspect a thing," I heard Vanessa say. "Rebecca's always been so trusting. It's almost too easy." Daniel sighed. "I still feel bad about this. She doesn't deserve." "Doesn't deserve what?" Vanessa interrupted. "A husband who's finally happy? You said yourself you've been bored for years. I'm just helping you feel alive again." I backed away, my hands trembling. The bistro bag dropped from my grip, the sound alerting them to my presence. There was a scramble of movement, and seconds later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of shock and guilt. "Rebecca, you're home early." We were just. Vanessa needed help with her resume. The lie fell flat between us. I couldn't confront them then. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming. Instead, I mumbled something about forgetting documents at the office and fled the house, tears blurring my vision as I drove aimlessly around the neighborhood. That night, I returned home with a fabricated story about the team dinner running late. I watched them carefully during dinner, noting how they avoided eye contact with each other and with me. Their performance was clumsy, with Vanessa being overly enthusiastic about a fictional job prospect and Daniel unusually interested in the details of my day. Over the next week, I began documenting everything: the whispered phone calls Daniel took in the garage, the shopping trips Vanessa took with my credit card, their coordinated errands that left them out of the house for hours. I installed a discreet tracking app on my laptop, which Vanessa frequently borrowed for her job searches, and discovered messages between them dating back months before she conveniently lost her job and apartment. The betrayal wasn't a recent development. It had been meticulously planned. Vanessa hadn't lost her job, she had quit. Her apartment wasn't foreclosed, she had deliberately stopped paying rent. All to execute a plan she and Daniel had concocted to move her into our home, right under my nose, while they carried on their affair and plotted their future together. One message particularly stood out, sent from Daniel to Vanessa 3 months ago. Once you're here, we'll have to be careful at first. But eventually, I'll suggest marriage counseling, claim irreconcilable differences, and with Massachusetts being a no-fault state, the divorce will be clean. Rebecca will get her half, but with her salary, she'll be fine on her own. They had it all figured out, or so they thought. What they failed to account for was that I wouldn't remain the trusting, naive woman they took me for. As the evidence mounted, so did my determination. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to learn that they had severely underestimated who they were playing with. While Daniel and Vanessa grew increasingly careless, believing their deception was working, I transformed into a silent investigator of my own life. No longer the trusting wife or supportive stepsister, I became a collector of evidence, a chronicler of betrayal, operating with a cold precision that surprised even myself. My first strategic move was to request a week-long business trip to our company's San Francisco office. It's unavoidable, I told Daniel over dinner, watching his face carefully. The West Coast team needs hands-on guidance with the new campaign. The flash of relief in his eyes was unmistakable, quickly masked by a performance of disappointment. We'll miss you, he said, reaching for my hand across the table. Beside him, Vanessa nodded enthusiastically, already planning their week of freedom in her mind. I'm sure you will, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. That night, while they thought I was packing for San Francisco, I was instead setting up microscopic cameras in strategic locations throughout the house, the living room, kitchen, hallway, and yes, even our bedroom. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings, and as a legal resident of the home, I was well within my rights. My friend Melissa, a cybersecurity expert I'd met through work, had helped me select equipment that would transmit footage directly to a secure cloud server I could access remotely. I did fly to San Francisco, but not for work. I had taken personal days instead, checking into a hotel where I spent the week watching my marriage disintegrate in high definition. They wasted no time, celebrating their temporary freedom with a bottle of champagne, my favorite champagne, which we had been saving for our upcoming anniversary, in our kitchen the very night I left. The footage was more devastating than I had anticipated. They weren't just having an affair, they were actively mocking me, laughing about how oblivious I was, planning their future in my home. Vanessa wore my clothes, used my expensive skincare products, and even practiced signing her name as Vanessa Morgan, taking not just my husband, but my identity as well. Daniel revealed himself to be a stranger, nothing like the man I thought I had married. Rebecca's always been too trusting, too eager to see the good in people, he told Vanessa as they lounged on our couch. It makes her a great person, but a clueless wife. Through tears, I watched them desecrate every corner of the home we had built together. But instead of breaking me, each betrayal hardened my resolve. I began compiling a dossier, screenshots, video clips, transcripts of their conversations. But I needed more than just evidence of their affair, I needed leverage. During my business trip, I also made several important calls. First to James Parker, the founding partner at Daniel's law firm and my husband's mentor. We had socialized with James and his wife Catherine many times over the years, and he had always treated me with genuine respect. James, I need to meet with you privately when I return, I said after pleasantries. It's sensitive and concerns Daniel. I would appreciate your discretion until then. Next, I contacted my own company's legal department, discreetly inquiring about Massachusetts divorce laws and employee rights. I spoke with my financial advisor, instructing him to provide me with a complete overview of all our assets and accounts. I called a private investigator recommended by Melissa, arranging for them to look into Vanessa's background more thoroughly. The investigators' findings proved invaluable. Vanessa had a pattern of inserting herself into relationships, creating dependency, then exploiting it for financial gain. 2 previous boyfriends had restraining orders against her, and a former roommate had pressed charges for identity theft, though Vanessa had managed to settle out of court. Most damning of all, she had been fired from her last 3 jobs for inappropriate relationships with married executives. Information she had carefully concealed from her employment records, but which the investigator uncovered through interviews with former colleagues. When I returned home after the week away, I was a different woman, composed, strategic, and fueled by a cold rage that gave me perfect clarity. I greeted them with convincing warmth, accepting their questions about my trip with fabricated enthusiasm. The San Francisco team is so talented, I gushed over the dinner they had performatively prepared. I'm thinking we might need to make these trips quarterly. Quarterly. Daniel frowned, exchanging a quick glance with Vanessa. That seems excessive. I smiled. Well, good leadership requires presence, doesn't it? Speaking of which, how was your week? Anything interesting happen while I was gone? They spun tales of productive work days and innocent evenings spent watching documentaries. I nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while thinking of the footage saved on my secure server, Daniel and Vanessa dancing half-naked in the kitchen, drinking wine in our bathtub, making plans for their future on the very dining table where we now sat. That night, as Daniel slept beside me in our bed, a bed he had shared with my stepsister just hours before I returned, I finalized my plans. The pieces were in place. The evidence was secured. Now, I just needed the perfect moment to spring the trap that would teach them both that some betrayals come with consequences they could never imagine. Little did they know that their comfortable world was about to implode, and I would be the one lighting the fuse. 3 days after my return, I set my plan in motion. I had chosen this timing carefully. It was the week of Daniel's biggest case of the year, representing a pharmaceutical company in a high-profile patent dispute. His successful handling of this case would determine his path to partnership at the firm. For Vanessa, it was the week she claimed to have 2 promising job interviews, though I knew from my surveillance that she had spent her days shopping with my credit card and meeting with a real estate agent to look at properties she and Daniel could move into. Once the divorce was finalized, I began with a simple text to Daniel during his lunch break. Need to talk tonight. Important. No excuses. His response came quickly, a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I didn't elaborate further, leaving him to wonder and worry throughout his afternoon of depositions. When he arrived home that evening, I was sitting calmly at the dining room table, a manila folder in front of me, dressed in the power suit I usually reserved for board presentations. "What's going on, Rebecca?" he asked, loosening his tie as he set down his briefcase. "I have prep work for tomorrow's cross-examination." "Sit down, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "This won't take long, but it will change everything." Confusion crossed his face as he reluctantly took a seat across from me. I had deliberately chosen a time when Vanessa was out, supposedly at a networking event. "Is everything okay?" he asked, attempting to sound concerned. I smiled thinly. "That depends entirely on your perspective." I opened the folder and slid a document across to him. "Do you recognize this?" He glanced down at the paper, his face draining of color as he recognized the printout of messages between him and Vanessa, dating back months before she had moved in. "Where did you?" "That's not important," I interrupted. "What's important is that I have everything. The messages, the videos, the audio recordings of you 2 planning your future together while plotting my demise." "Quite comprehensive." His lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. "You can't legally record. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings, as you well know." I cut him off again. "And I'm a legal resident of this home. So yes, I can." And I did. I watched as he calculated his options, his legal mind working through scenarios and defenses. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice low. "I've already gotten what I want from you," I replied. "Your true character has been revealed. Now I'm simply here to inform you of what happens next." I outlined my terms clearly. He would move out immediately, agree to my divorce settlement without contest, and resign from his position at the firm citing personal reasons. In return, I wouldn't send the evidence of his affair to every partner at Wilson and Parker, particularly the footage where he discussed confidential client information with Vanessa. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "This is my career we're talking about. I'm weeks away from making partner." "You should have thought about that before you invited my stepsister into our bed," I said coldly. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Choose wisely." I left him sitting there, stunned and silent, and retired to the guest room where I had moved my essentials. Through the camera feed on my phone, I watched him pace the kitchen, making frantic calls, presumably to Vanessa. I had blocked her number on my phone days ago, but I knew she would be rushing home soon. As expected, Vanessa burst through the front door 30 minutes later, her face flushed with panic. Their hushed, frantic conversation in the kitchen was captured perfectly by my hidden devices. They cycled through denial, anger, and finally desperate strategizing. Daniel, ever the attorney, suggested they could deny everything, claim the evidence was fabricated. "She's bluffing," Vanessa insisted. "She doesn't have the spine to follow through." That night, as they whispered together in our bedroom, I executed the next phase of my plan. I forwarded selected clips to James Parker with a brief, professional note explaining that while I had no desire to damage the firm's reputation, I could not in good conscience allow Daniel to continue representing clients while demonstrating such egregious ethical lapses. I included a clip where Daniel specifically discussed confidential information about the pharmaceutical case, violating attorney-client privilege in his attempts to impress Vanessa. I then sent a comprehensive file to my divorce attorney, who had papers ready to file at the courthouse first thing in the morning. Finally, I drafted emails to our mutual friends and family members, not to expose the affair immediately, but to have ready if needed. Where are you in your life journey right now? As I waited that night for the fallout of my decisions, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered their laughter, their mockery, their complete disregard for the pain they were causing. Sometimes, justice requires difficult choices. If you're enjoying this journey through one of the hardest moments of my life, hit that like button and stay with me. The most shocking parts of this family betrayal story are still coming up, and you won't believe how karma finally caught up to them. The next morning, Daniel received a call from James Parker requesting his immediate presence at the office. He left in a hurry, shooting worried glances at Vanessa, who had taken to pacing our living room, still confident they could outsmart me. While they were both out, I had the locks changed and arranged for security to be present when they returned. Then I went to meet James Parker myself, as we had arranged the previous night. The meeting was brief but impactful. James expressed his deep disappointment in Daniel and assured me that the firm would handle the matter with the utmost discretion and appropriate severity. He also, to my surprise, offered to connect me with their family law department should I need representation in my divorce. "We value integrity above all else, Rebecca," he said as I prepared to leave. "Daniel violated that in both his personal and professional life. You, however, have shown remarkable strength and principle. If you ever need anything, my door is open." By the time I returned home, the news had broken. Daniel had been placed on immediate leave pending an ethics investigation. His key card had been deactivated, his cases reassigned. His carefully constructed professional reputation was crumbling before his eyes. Vanessa was waiting on our front porch, unable to enter due to the changed locks. Her previous confidence had morphed into desperate anger. "You can't do this," she shouted as I calmly walked past her to the door. "This is my home too." "Actually, it's not," I replied, turning to face her. "Your name isn't on the lease, the mortgage, or any utility bill. You have no legal claim to this property." "I'll tell everyone what a vindictive bitch you are," she threatened. I smiled, unperturbed. Feel free. And I'll share the videos of you trying on my clothes, practicing my signature, and discussing how you plan to take my place. I wonder how that will play out in our social circle. The security guard I had hired stood nearby, ensuring she couldn't force her way in. I entered my home alone, closing the door on her stream of threats and insults. Within hours, both Daniel and Vanessa had been effectively removed from my life, though the aftermath of their betrayal would take longer to process. Daniel, facing professional ruin and personal humiliation, agreed to my settlement terms without further argument. Vanessa, blacklisted by our social circle and now homeless, was reduced to sleeping in her car until she could find another victim to manipulate. As I sat alone in my reclaimed home that evening, surrounded by the echoes of a life now ended, I felt not victory, but a hollow sense of justice. The family I thought I had, imperfect but bound by loyalty, had been an illusion. The husband I trusted had been a facade. The stepsister I tried to help had been plotting my downfall. But in exposing their betrayal, I had also rediscovered my own strength. The woman who emerged from this crucible was not broken but tempered, like steel forged in fire. The orchestrated downfall of Daniel and Vanessa wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences, the natural result of actions taken without regard for the damage they would cause. As night fell on the first day of my new life, I realized that sometimes family isn't determined by blood or marriage, but by the genuine respect and loyalty people show each other. By that definition, Daniel and Vanessa had never truly been my family at all. In the aftermath of the explosive revelation, I found support from the most unexpected places. People I had considered mere acquaintances stepped forward to become pillars of strength, while some I had counted as close friends retreated into uncomfortable silence. The reshuffling of my social world was yet another aftershock in the earthquake that had destroyed my marriage. The first surprise ally came in the form of Catherine Parker, James's wife. She appeared at my door one evening with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "I thought you might need company," she said simply. "And someone who won't ask if you're okay when you're clearly not." We sat on my patio into the early hours, Catherine listening as I poured out the full story. Unlike others who offered platitudes about everything happening for a reason, Catherine offered practical wisdom from her own experience as a divorce attorney before she retired to raise their children. "The legal proceedings are just formalities," she told me, refilling our glasses. "The real work is rebuilding your sense of self after someone tries to erase it. That's the journey you're on now." Through Catherine, I was introduced to a group of professional women who had weathered similar storms: a neurosurgeon whose husband had embezzled their savings, a judge whose partner had led a double life for years, a tech executive who discovered her wife's affair through an accidentally shared cloud account. They called themselves the Phoenix Circle, women who had risen from the ashes of betrayal to build stronger lives. "Men like Daniel thrive on isolation," explained Diane, the judge, during one of our weekly dinners. "They separate you from support systems, making you believe the relationship is your only foundation. When that's gone, they expect you to collapse entirely." "Vanessa counted on that too," I added. "They both thought I'd be too devastated to function, let alone fight back." The women nodded in understanding. They had all faced similar expectations and defied them just as I had. Professionally, another unexpected alliance formed. James Parker, true to his word, had not only handled Daniel's departure from the firm with discretion, but had also introduced me to several clients who needed marketing expertise. My company, impressed by how I maintained my professional performance despite personal turmoil, fast-tracked my promotion to Vice President of Strategic Marketing. "Crisis reveals character," my CEO told me during the promotion meeting. "And yours has proven exceptional." Even my parents, who had initially struggled to accept the breakdown of my marriage and the role their stepdaughter had played in it, eventually came to stand firmly in my corner. My mother, who had always tried to foster harmony between Vanessa and me, was especially devastated. "I pushed you to include her in your life," she said tearfully during their first visit after the divorce. I never imagined she could do something like this. You couldn't have known, I assured her, though part of me wondered if I should have seen the signs earlier myself. My father, typically stoic, surprised me with his emotional response. He had always been fond of Daniel, considering him the son he never had. "I failed you," he said gruffly as we walked through my neighborhood one morning. A father should be able to see through people who would hurt his daughter. "We were all fooled, Dad," I replied. "Their deception was thorough." He shook his head. "Not thorough enough in the end. You saw through it when it mattered. I'm proud of how you handled it, with dignity and strength." His words healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still wounded. Not everyone in my life proved supportive. Several couples who had been regular fixtures at our dinner parties suddenly became too busy to meet. Some mutual friends attempted to stay neutral, suggesting that there are always two sides to every story. A few even implied that my career focus had driven Daniel to seek comfort elsewhere, a narrative I refused to entertain. The most surprising reaction came from Vanessa's biological father, who contacted me 6 weeks after everything imploded. We met at a cafe halfway between Boston and his home in New Hampshire, his weathered face lined with regret. "I should have been more present in her life," he said, stirring his coffee absently. "After her mother and I divorced, I let too many years go by. By the time I tried to reconnect, the damage was done." "You can't blame yourself for her choices," I said, the words feeling strangely familiar, the same ones I had been telling myself about Daniel. "No, but I can acknowledge the role I played in shaping who she became," he replied. "The abandonment issues, the constant need for validation, the inability to form healthy attachments. I see my failures reflected in her actions." His candor was refreshing after weeks of people either vilifying Vanessa entirely or making excuses for her behavior. He saw her as I was beginning to, not as a monster or a victim, but as a deeply flawed person whose wounds had led her to inflict greater wounds on others. "Have you spoken to her?" I asked. He nodded, his expression grim. "She's living in a motel off Route 1, working at a diner. She refuses any help from me unless it's cash with no strings attached. Says she's planning to move to California once she saves enough." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction that she was facing consequences, pity for the desperate circumstances she had created for herself, and a lingering ember of anger that might never fully extinguish. Through these new connections and rekindled relationships, I began to construct a different understanding of family. Blood and legal ties had failed me spectacularly, but these bonds formed through shared experience, genuine support, and mutual respect were proving far more durable. For months after Daniel moved out, I hosted my first dinner party in the renovated dining room. Gone was the heavy mahogany table where Daniel and I had entertained for years, replaced by a round table crafted by a local artisan. The Phoenix Circle women were there, along with colleagues who had stood by me, new friends, and family members who had proven their loyalty. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I looked around at these faces. Some I had known all my life, others I had met only in the aftermath of betrayal, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. These were my people now, chosen with greater wisdom and bound by something stronger than obligation or habit. "To unexpected alliances," I said, raising my glass. "And to the families we choose." The responding chorus of agreement filled the room, drowning out the last echoes of the betrayal that had once threatened to define me. In its place was something unexpected and beautiful, a community built on authenticity rather than appearance, on substance rather than surface. Daniel and Vanessa had sought to replace me in my own life. Instead, they had inadvertently set me free to create something far more meaningful than the illusion they had shattered. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, I was flourishing in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of discovery and confrontation. My promotion had come with stock options that had already appreciated significantly. I had redecorated the house entirely, exorcising the last visual reminders of my life with Daniel. The Phoenix Circle had expanded to include other women and a few men, seeking community after betrayal, meeting monthly in my reimagined living room. Daniel and Vanessa, meanwhile, were experiencing what my mother would call the chickens coming home to roost. I had moved on with my life, deliberately avoiding any contact with either of them, but news inevitably filtered back through mutual acquaintances. Each update confirmed what I had come to believe, that some lessons can only be learned through consequence, and some people are incapable of learning even then. Daniel's professional downfall had been swift and comprehensive. The ethics investigation at Wilson and Parker had uncovered more than just his indiscretions with Vanessa. His ambition had led him to cut corners on multiple cases, misrepresent billable hours, and even alter documents to strengthen his arguments. James Parker, honoring client confidentiality while still enforcing accountability, had given Daniel the option to resign rather than face disbarment proceedings. But the legal community in Boston is small and tightly networked. Despite technically leaving on his own terms, Daniel found himself unemployable at any reputable firm. His former colleagues, many of whom had privately resented his arrogance for years, were not inclined to provide references or make introductions. The prestigious career he had built, the partnership track he had been so close to achieving, evaporated like morning mist. Financially, the divorce settlement had left him with his personal savings and investments, but no claim to our home or my rapidly appreciating company stock. He had been confident of quickly rebuilding his wealth with his legal expertise, not anticipating how thoroughly his professional reputation would be destroyed. Vanessa's situation had deteriorated even further. After a brief stint living with Daniel in his hastily rented apartment, their relationship had imploded spectacularly. Without the thrill of secrecy and the comfort of my home, the fundamental emptiness of their connection became impossible to ignore. Catherine Parker, whose social network extended throughout Boston's professional circles, reported that Daniel had thrown Vanessa out after discovering she had been systematically draining his remaining savings account. She had apparently opened credit cards in his name as well, maxing them out on designer clothes and spa treatments while claiming to be looking for work. The irony, Catherine noted over brunch, is that he can't even report the identity theft without publicly admitting he was duped twice, first by bringing her into your marriage, then by trusting her with his finances. Vanessa had indeed moved to California as her father mentioned, but not to the fresh start she had envisioned. Instead, she had tracked down a wealthy former boyfriend in San Diego, attempting to reinsert herself into his life with claims of having changed and matured. He had recently divorced, making him vulnerable to her practiced manipulations. What Vanessa hadn't counted on was that his ex-wife would recognize the pattern from her own experience. The two women compared notes, identified Vanessa's textbook techniques, and the former boyfriend filed a restraining order based on Vanessa's history of predatory behavior. I learned this from Diane, whose judicial connections span nationwide. She contested the restraining order, Diane told me during one of our Phoenix Circle meetings. Big mistake. Everything came out in the hearing, the pattern of targeting married or recently divorced men, the financial exploitation, even some evidence suggesting she had done this at least 6 times before Daniel. The cosmic justice continued to unfold without any effort on my part. Daniel, desperate for income, had taken a position teaching business law at a community college, only to have students discover his history and file complaints about being instructed in ethics by someone with his record. Vanessa, running out of potential targets in California, had moved to Nevada, where her tactics were meeting with increasingly limited success as her reputation preceded her. Perhaps the most satisfying karmic return came unexpectedly, through a chance encounter at a conference in New York. I was representing my company, presenting our latest healthcare marketing campaign to an auditorium of industry professionals. As I concluded my presentation to enthusiastic applause, I noticed a familiar figure slipping out of the back row, Daniel, looking considerably older than when I'd last seen him, wearing a badge identifying him as a representative of a struggling pharmaceutical startup. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. I saw recognition, then shame, then a hasty retreat. Later that evening, a colleague mentioned meeting a rather desperate-seeming man who claimed to have connections at Wilson and Parker but couldn't provide any current contacts there. He asked a lot of questions about you, my colleague said. I got the impression he was hoping to leverage some kind of connection, but he clammed up when I mentioned you were being headhunted by 3 major firms. I smiled, not bothering to explain. The tables had turned so completely. Now it was Daniel on the outside looking in, watching the success he had tried to steal from me continue to grow beyond his reach. That night in my hotel room, I received an email from a generic address. "I'm sorry for everything," it read simply. No name was attached, but it didn't need one. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to merit acknowledgement. The most unexpected twist in this saga of karmic retribution came from Vanessa's biological father. He had reconnected with me occasionally, updating me on his efforts to establish healthier boundaries with his daughter while still offering her the emotional support she had always lacked. "She's hit rock bottom," he told me during one of our infrequent calls. Living in a weekly rate motel in Reno, working as a cocktail waitress, and finally, seeing a therapist. "Do you think she's genuinely changing?" I asked, skeptical after everything that had happened. "I think she's out of options," he replied honestly. "But sometimes that's what it takes. She mentioned you the other day, said she understands now why what they did was so devastating. Not just the betrayal, but the attempt to steal your identity, your home, your life." I wasn't ready to accept this as genuine remorse, but it was something. The universe had delivered consequences I could never have orchestrated, the natural outcomes of their own choices. Meanwhile, my own life continued to expand in ways that would have been impossible had I remained in that marriage. I had started dating again, cautiously and selectively. I had joined the board of a nonprofit supporting women rebuilding their lives after domestic abuse and betrayal. I had even begun writing a book about resilience after relationship trauma, with the Phoenix Circle members contributing their stories. The ultimate karmic justice wasn't what happened to Daniel and Vanessa. It was what happened to me, the discovery that betrayal hadn't diminished me, but had instead revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. They had intended to discard me, to render me irrelevant in my own story. Instead, they had inadvertently freed me to become the protagonist of a far better narrative than the one they had tried to steal. 2 years after discovering my husband and stepsister's betrayal, I stood at the podium of a literary festival, looking out at an audience of several hundred people who had come to hear me speak about my newly published memoir, Rising: Reclaiming Your Life After Betrayal. The journey from devastated wife to published author, from victim to advocate, had been transformative in ways I could never have imagined during those dark days. The book had begun as personal therapy, journaling sessions where I processed my anger, grief, and eventually my growth. My Phoenix Circle friends had encouraged me to transform these raw reflections into something that might help others. What started as a series of blog posts had caught the attention of a literary agent, and 18 months later, I was holding the hardcover in my hands, my name embossed on the cover. The greatest gift my betrayers inadvertently gave me, I told the attentive audience, was the opportunity to discover who I really am when everything familiar is stripped away. We often define ourselves by our relationships: wife, sister, daughter, friend. When those identities are shattered, we're forced to answer the question, who am I at my core, without those labels? The memoir had resonated with readers nationwide, particularly women who had experienced similar betrayals. My inbox filled daily with messages from people thanking me for articulating what they had lived through, for providing a roadmap through the wilderness of betrayal and out the other side. Professionally, I had exceeded even my own ambitious expectations. 6 months after my promotion to VP, I had been recruited by a major healthcare innovation company to serve as their chief marketing officer. The position came with double my previous salary, equity in a rapidly growing enterprise, and a level of creative control I had only dreamed of previously. I had relocated from Boston to San Francisco, leaving behind the house that held so many painful memories and starting fresh in a light-filled condo overlooking the bay. My social circle had evolved as well. The Phoenix Circle had chapters in 12 cities now, including San Francisco, where I had connected with a new group of survivors-turned-thrivers. We met monthly, but our support extended far beyond those formal gatherings. These women had become my chosen family, bound by shared experience and mutual respect rather than blood or legal ties. Dating had been a gradual process of relearning trust. After a series of casual connections that helped me remember I was still desirable and worthy of attention, I had met Julian, a pediatric surgeon with a gentle manner and absolute transparency. Our relationship had developed slowly, each of us carrying lessons from past heartbreaks. 8 months in, we were discussing moving in together, approaching the milestone with thoughtful intention rather than rushing toward an idealized future. "I need you to understand," I had told him early in our relationship, "that I will always verify. I will never again operate on blind trust." Instead of being offended, he had nodded. "That's reasonable. Trust, but verify isn't just for international relations. It's for anyone who's learned the hard way that people aren't always what they seem." That response had been my first indication that Julian might be someone worth investing in emotionally. As for Daniel and Vanessa, their shadows had gradually receded from my life. The last I had heard, Daniel had left the country, taking a position at a small law firm in Panama where his past was unknown and ethics oversight was minimal. Vanessa had apparently completed a rehabilitation program for substance abuse, an issue I hadn't known about during our time as stepsisters, and was working as an administrative assistant in a small town in Oregon, living a quiet, unremarkable life far removed from her previous schemes. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, no vindictive pleasure in their struggles. What I felt, surprisingly, was indifference. They had become characters in an old story, one I occasionally shared as part of my speaking engagements, but no longer revisited in my private thoughts. The power they once held over my emotions had dissipated entirely. My parents had found their own path to healing as well. My mother, initially devastated by Vanessa's betrayal, had channeled her energy into volunteer work with blended families, helping parents navigate the complex dynamics that she had failed to manage effectively. My father, whose health had suffered during the stress of those months, had recovered his vigor and developed a close relationship with Julian, the two of them bonding over their shared love of sailing. Looking out at the audience at the literary festival, I concluded my speech with the passage that had resonated most deeply with readers. Betrayal is not just the breaking of trust, it's an invitation to rebuild your life according to your own blueprint rather than following the plans others have drawn for you. It is both a devastation and an opportunity, the end of what was and the beginning of what could be. The choice we all face after betrayal is whether to remain defined by what was done to us or to become defined by what we do next. The applause was warm and sustained. As I stepped away from the podium, I noticed a woman in the back row, not Vanessa, but someone with a similar lost look in her eyes that my stepsister had often displayed. She was clutching my book like a lifeline, tears streaming down her face. I made a mental note to find her during the signing portion of the event, to tell her personally what I had learned through experience, that the people who try to destroy you often become the unwitting catalysts for your greatest transformation. Later that evening, as Julian and I walked along the waterfront, he asked me if I ever regretted exposing Daniel and Vanessa rather than simply walking away. "Never," I replied without hesitation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. In protecting myself and ensuring they faced the results of their actions, I reclaimed my power. That was the first step toward building this new life. He squeezed my hand, understanding without needing further explanation. As we watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from betrayal to rebuilding, from victim to victor. The path had been painful, but the destination had proven worth every difficult step. Have you ever experienced a moment when betrayal turned into blessing in disguise? When the people who tried to hurt you actually set you free? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this family karma story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that surviving betrayal isn't just possible, it can be the beginning of your best chapter yet. Thank you for being part of my journey through this difficult, but ultimately empowering experience. Remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Until next time.